Welcome to the Violin Podcast, where we have conversations with violinists from around the world. I'm your host, Eric Mrugala. Thank you for joining us today. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so that way you get notified for when new episodes come out. My guest today is the co-founder of Things for Strings and the co-creator of the Bowhold Buddy. She is a Suzuki Violin Program Coordinator and Visiting Specialist for Montclair University. She has served as a clinician at the South Carolina Suzuki Institute at Furman University and is an active performer and chamber coach in the New York City area. Please let me welcome Ruth Brons. Ruth, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of your Bowhold Buddy, by the way, and I would love to talk to you about that because it works. And
Yes,
again, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it.
you're welcome.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, you're the co-creator of the Bowhold Buddy, and that's a very entrepreneurial thing as a musician to kind of create a product and put it out to market. And even before we started recording, you mentioned that you can't wait for opportunities to come your way. So, but before we get to that, I want the audience to learn more a little. I want the audience to learn more a little bit about you. So, can you share us your background in violin, how you got into teaching and performing?
I am, I don't know, fifth or sixth generation music teacher. My great grandmother's mother was a piano teacher. It's pretty much continued since then. My mother's a cellist and cello teacher, and my daughter teaches. She's now has a school orchestra teaching job. So it was just kind of inevitable. I always like the psychology of teaching, and I love music. I went to school in Philadelphia and got my master's in viola performance. And meanwhile, my mother kept on encouraging me to take Suzuki teacher trainings all through school. So I was thoroughly indoctrinated in the philosophy that every child can, and it's the teacher's job just to figure out how to get that child to do it. By the time I had my first student, and I've been enjoying figuring kids out ever since.
I think that's always a constant battle, trying to figure out what the kids are thinking these days. Definitely the kids growing up in 2021 are it's definitely different than how I grew up. You know, I would never have thought in my age I would be teaching and let alone be taking lessons virtually through the internet, which is which has been just kind of a mind-boggling thing. As we're still in the COVID-19 pandemic. But
Yeah, it's hard. About 10 years or so ago, I had a student who had been with me for maybe 5 years already. He started when he was really little. His family moved to Saudi Arabia, and their parting gift to me was a webcam. And I'm like, what do I do with this? And they said, because you're going to still be Thomas's teacher. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. That does not sound fun. But they finally convinced me that literally there was not anybody that could work with him within a couple 100 miles.
wow.
And so I did work with him for about 5 years until he came back to the States to go to boarding high school. And, he kept up with his class. It was pretty amazing what we were able to do over Zoom. You just have to use words more.
Right. I think, especially, I think one of the most important things as a music educator is the ability to communicate. And especially, you have to describe violin technique a lot more specifically, not just for the student, but I'm sure for the parent, because the parent is there attending the lesson
Yeah, but
a lot
they're
of the
usually
time.
off screen, and I don't really know what they're doing. So I've kind
Mm,
of just tuned them out. I approach it that the child is my client, and I'm 110% focused on that. Once you get past the first dozen lessons where you're trying to get the parent off their cell phone to understand that I really want them to participate a little bit, but parents are very busy these days.
yeah, no telling. And I'm sure there are a lot of parents who actually listen to the Violin Podcast, so I'm sure that they can relate to what you're saying, that all of a sudden they're working from home or they have been
Yeah,
working from home for a very long time and then trying to create that mental space to help you know teach or even practice with their child at a very high level. We kind of had to bend the rules a little bit. At least for me, I had to bend the rules a little bit and kind of reset the expectations of what I expected out of the families, because as you probably can attest to, that music is a very family-oriented activity where you can get everybody involved. And you teach Suzuki. So I wanted to get your take on your philosophies on Suzuki and what you find valuable or invaluable about Suzuki.
Um, I mean, Dr. Suzuki's been gone now for over 20 years. And even during when he was still alive, there started to get to be misconceptions about what is Suzuki. And I always remember one time my mother was in Japan at a Suzuki conference, and we'd been to many conferences with Dr. Suzuki, so he at least looked like he recognized faces. And he was riding the elevator with my mother, and he said, "Hello, who are you?" And my mother said, "Martha Brons." And he said, "I am Shiniki Suzuki. I teach the Shiniki Suzuki method, and you teach the Martha Brons method." He was trying to say, he never liked the idea of Suzuki method, but this is how you do it. He was all about the philosophy, is that you need to believe that the child can, and we believe that the child probably should, that there's many benefits, and that it's our job just to figure it out, try anything, learn from anywhere, learn from the child, learn from other teachers, learn from reading, learn from videos, use all available resources. He was, the big resource that he learned about when he was a young man and discovered the violin was the, recordings, the record. And I think, I like to think that he would have embraced any technology or gizmo or gadget that would help kids develop their talent.
Yeah, the entire Suzuki philosophy is all about talent education, right? But it's interesting what you say that the Shiniki Suzuki method is different than the Martha Brons method. I think
He did not,
that's what makes the education so personal.
right. He did not expect it to be all cookie cutter. And just last week, I got an email from a Suzuki teacher in Canada, and she'd come across a blog post I'd done 10 years ago, where I showed my review chart that I use with my kids. I still use the same file. And she said, "I noticed you've got some fiddle tunes on there. That's not Suzuki. I've been teaching Suzuki for 5 years, and I think my kids would really like to learn fiddle tunes because that's really big in Canada, but I don't want to, not be Suzuki." It just makes me so angry that there's this message that goes out there that Suzuki is limiting. I wrote back and I said, you have to teach from your heart. I always try at every lesson to say, "I love this," because I'm sharing something that's very personal to me. Music is personal. And if fiddle tunes are relevant in your culture and or your students' culture, by all means, throw them in.
I think, yeah, spot on to what I was thinking. I think that Suzuki, the books in general, they offer a really good template. I'd say they offer a good template, and then you can go with the template, or depending on what the level of the student is, if he or she is progressing, or much rather kind of go with the template. I think it'll be very nice to branch out. I know that there's a musician down in the South. His name is David Cutler, who actually recomposed the idea of the Suzuki books into like rock and jazz kind of melodies and
Yeah,
harmonies. So I encourage people to take a look at that.
I will look at for David Cutler. I'll remember that.
Yeah, he's yeah, I actually was able to interview him on the Everyday Musician podcast, and we talked a little bit about his process and how he did a Kickstarter, and the whole business side of things is what I'm really interested in, because we're no different in my mind, in my view, than Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven. They were all entrepreneurs back in their day trying to create music, trying to create content for an audience. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit about catering to your students and your clients and your audience, and with the Bohold Buddy, because it's such a really neat invention. Can you tell us the backstory behind the Bohold Buddy and how that came about?
Well, half of my family are musicians, the other half are engineers. And I always thought that somebody would make it. And I remember when I was closer to your age. I've been teaching maybe 5 years, teaching at a lovely private school and sitting on the edge of the stage because I taught in their all-purpose room after school. And I was putting finger tapes on a kid's violin. And I remember Ben said, why don't you invent a clear sticker with all the frets on it? And I said, well, that's a great idea, but I'm only 26 and I would have no idea how to get this off the ground. So, and I funneled my entrepreneurial spirit back then into wedding quartets. We were doing four weddings a weekend, pretty much for 10 years with my quartet back in those days. But then, later when this idea occurred to me, I was preparing my students for the first time for the American String Teachers Association ASTACAP, Certificate Advancement Program exam. And, I was nervous about letting somebody else look at my babies, my students, and look at their different aspects of violin playing. They had a 10-point rubric back then, and one of the points was bow hold. So I thought, well, the exam's in May, it's February, let's make this bow hold inspection week. And I just really, really, really looked at every kid's bow hold. To this day, I don't know why there was a roll of duct tape in the room, but
probably for the unlimited pinky nest that you're probably about to build.
Right. I made lots of pinky nests, and then the kids were like, well, why can't you make me a thumb nest? Because that's really cool. And so I made a thumb nest. And for years, I'd always been sticking a piece of chalk or an eraser or something between the index and the middle finger. Remembering Yasha Brodsky always had a cigarette in his hand, the old Russian violin teacher way.
That's pretty Russian right
with
there.
ashes just going down on his violin. It was very Russian, very, very 1960s, 70s. And so, I was always thinking about that spacing there. And when I put a third piece, a wad of duct tape there, I just saw the kids' hands relax, and they all got this goofy smile on their face. And then I realized I was onto something, because it's not this finger goes here and this finger goes there. It's that whole relaxed and flexible approach. That's why you do see different variations of the bow hold that work for fine players. It's because they're not grippy about it, they're relaxed. And so I went home, and on the drive home, I remember thinking, well, I don't really need the houses. What I'm really trying to do is fill in the areas where I don't want the fingers to wander into. And at the time I had 80 students, because it was right before the 2009 financial crisis, and I wasn't saying no to students. I had too many. But so after making 80 custom fixes, I had it pretty clear in my head that if I just put a blob of clay on a bad bow and stuffed my fingers into it and removed what wasn't absolutely necessary to keep the fingers from wandering too far out of position, I'd end up with what I wanted. And I was really happy with it. And the duct tape things didn't work for more than a week or two, because they all got smashed and stiff. And,
right, or gaffer's tape, or
right, and
or the corn strips. Try to put them in the pinky.
Oh, I can't tell you how many times I came home from teaching with those corn pads on my pants, and I never used them. They the school teachers would put them on, but they don't stay in one place, and they didn't really do the job, because when a kid's hand wants to do something, they can be pretty forceful about it.
Yeah, I'm definitely. I mean, even for me, like back in the day, they taught us in like pedagogy class on how to make the pinky nest, and if you emergency situation, you have like the corn strips. But I find that like even it's like too gunky. Like it's like the glue. It doesn't make it really like a pleasurable experience to hold the bow. It doesn't make it fun. But I also
I realized I didn't want to go with glue. I needed it to be adjustable for all hand sizes. And I was driving home, I realized, well, I know a rubber manufacturer. My old Girl Scout leader's family, 3rd generation rubber manufacturers. Maybe I'll go have a chat and get 50 or so of these made. Well, then I found out how expensive it would be. To get the molds, injection molding is very pricey. And so I talked about it with my mom, who then was convinced that cellists needed a similar thing of filling in the negative space. And we didn't think about it too long, maybe a day. And we thought, okay, we're all in. We really want this, because we were thinking that in a 30-minute lesson, typically I would spend at least 5 minutes tinkering with a kid's bow hold.
Right.
For maybe 5 years. That's a lot of lesson minutes. By the time they had been studying 5 years, then they had a reliable bow hold. But you still look at it. You still have to keep watching it until they go off to college. And I thought, well, hopefully other violin teachers will care as much and realize that they can save a lot of lesson time by putting this on. Now the child's first lesson, I can cover the bow hold and the bow and pizzicato and the names of the parts of the instrument, and even playing the open E a few times. I can do all of that in a 30-minute lesson.
Yeah, you get straight to the content. You don't have to worry about a year of having to play with bow hold anymore.
Right. Yeah. And so the kids are getting much further, much faster. And they leave the lesson saying, "Oh, I'm awesome at the bow hold." And I'm like, I've won, because if you keep picking at a child's bow hold or anything, if you just keep picking at it, what they're not thinking is, oh, how lucky I am that I have a teacher that cares about this important technique and is making sure I understand it. They're thinking that there's something really hard about this and I'm not very good at it, and perhaps I should try something else.
Right, and that gets them to be discouraged about the instrument entirely, because even though they might have a good left hand, then their right hand all of a sudden has been a huge problem for a very long time. And it just gets very discouraging for the students, also for the teachers, because it gets really draining as a teacher to be able to, like, okay, let's pick the pinky, let's pick the spacing, make sure the hands are nice and relaxed.
That week I was looking at everybody's bow hold. I was just about ready to go to a tattoo parlor and under my bangs get bent thumb, curved pinky. And I just saved myself some breath. And also because they do have a relaxed and effective bow hold from the very first lesson, they can make good sounds, and that's its own reward.
That's incredible to know that it was kind of like a spark of inspiration for you. And I think sometimes with these really awesome business ideas is that you could be doing something random. Like, I love all these entrepreneurial musician stories about like an app, or for your situation, the bow hold buddies. Like, yeah, there was a need for this, so why not me just take advantage of the opportunity and to provide something valuable for people. And
we were not sure that other teachers would care.
Right. Yeah. Just like with this podcast, like, I don't know if people are going to be listening to our banter right now, but
you do it because it's important. And that's what my mom and I figured, that, between the two of us at the time, we had over 75 years of teaching between us. And we thought, well, if we never make our money back on paying for these molds and everything else that goes along with starting a business, we're going to enjoy our teaching a whole lot more. And we're going to still be teaching either way. And after I arrived at the basic form and function of what I wanted to do, then I'm like, oh, duh, it has to be colorful, and duh, it has to have animals. And
yeah, I love the fish nest, and I love the actual frog between the index finger and the second finger.
The frog took me 2 weeks to come up with, because when I started playing with the basic shape, I thought, well, what animal could it be? And I'm a cat person, so I kept on thinking it was that wedge was a profile of a seated cat, and I couldn't get the head small enough. And I thought, well, what other animal has a really small brain and a big butt? And I've had some rude answers when I've told other people about this before, but the only animal I could think of was a frog. And when that hit me, it was like, why didn't I think of that 2 weeks ago? Because I'm not a sculptor, I'm not an artist. Why? It was
a frog at a frog.
To come up with all that.
A frog at the frog.
And then I thought, well, what? Then for the pinky support, I thought, well, a tadpole would be kind of gross. So I came up with a fish for his little friend.
It's just wonderful to hear this backstory, because my story with the Violin Podcast was like, there are a bunch of music podcasts out there, but is there a violin podcast? So I'm like, okay, I go on the internet, I'm like violinpodcast.com, and I go, oh my gosh, it's not taken. So I'm like, there's a clear need to make sure that the Violin Podcast is a resource for all musicians and all violinists. So I'm like, it was just like, it was obvious to me at that point that it was a need that people might want to listen to interviews and conversations with violins, and in your case, violas. And
And have you been surprised by the amount of adult beginners, adult self learners that have found you? Because that surprised me.
yeah, it surprised me too. I think the listenership of the Violin Podcast has been all over the place. I mean, we know that the demographic has been like closer to like musicians entering conservatories and music college between the ages of 18 and 24. But there is a huge interest between 35 and 44, which was quite interesting to me whenever I look at my statistics for the Violin Podcast and how I can, spread it out to more people in different age groups. That is shocking to me. And a lot of people, like, I send the interviews to my students, and the parents are like, wow, like, we listened to this episode and we applied it in the lesson and we applied it in the practice room and it worked. Like, this person had really something valuable to say about practicing, and we tried it and it worked. And it's encouraging to know that, like, I'm providing a solution as you are, just trying to create a lot of value for your client, as you would say, because in many ways our students are our clients, and we want to make sure we best serve them as best as possible. But I want to get to know you more as like a performer and chamber musician, because you are a chamber musician in the New York City area. What kind of chamber music do you like to play?
Quartets.
Quartets. Any specific reason why? That was a really quick answer, by the way. It's like quartets, and I know you have a history of like wedding quartets, but like, yeah, can you describe?
My training was deep into chamber music. My conservatory, the New School of Music, which is now part of Temple University, was run by the Curtis String Quartet, and it was very heavy on string quartet playing. And I spent several summers with Charlie Castleman's quartet program, again, very heavy on quartet playing. And I'm actually a fraud as a violinist because I started on viola, and I love the role of viola, how it's sometimes supporting the second violin, sometimes I'm with a cello, and those rare opportunities where you actually get a bit of melody. And I love being the supportive role, the inner color of the group. I just love it.
That's a very Mozartian thing you said. Mozart always loved being in the middle of the music too. So any kind of particular, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, and when I sang in choirs as a kid, I much preferred singing alto. I love to add. I love to be the one that is not necessarily center stage and in a hot seat, but I love to add. I remember once I was pregnant, and my quartet had a rehearsal without me, and for some reason, when I rejoined them at the next rehearsal, they said, "Yeah, we didn't really miss you when you were gone, but it does sound better that you're back."
Oh, at least they're honest.
I just like making things a little better.
Yeah. I have a lot of respect for my viola colleagues. I had a professor back in conservatory who I had the privilege of learning from, and he also played a lot of viola. So my studio was combined with violin and viola as well. So I learned a lot about viola, despite not having touched a viola. So whenever
it's the same, but it feels oh so different.
Yeah, and of course, violas, if you're listening to the podcast, then forgive me, but there are similarities, right? And then, but the arm weight, I think, is a huge thing. All of a sudden you make yourself create these huge muscles, these huge shoulder muscles to dig in and pull the string and pull the sound out of the instrument.
Much more sinky into the string rather than float above the string sort of playing.
Yeah. Do you teach violist at all, or is it primarily violinists?
Most of them, it's hard to make a full studio of viola students. I'll just tell you.
That's a viola joke right there.
I don't have any viola students right now. Typically, what usually happens is around middle school. I'll point out the competitive advantages, like with all-state competitions, to consider the viola, and I might swing a student here and there over to the dark side then. Or a lot of times, if I have a kid that has completed all 10 levels of the ASTICAP program, they'll like to challenge themselves and do it again do the highest level again on viola. So I'm really proud that I've gotten a couple of students. They in 10th grade they finished their ASTA program with their Mozart concerto, and then a year or two later they're doing the Walton concerto on viola.
That's
I'm really proud.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I think every violinist, I think, should get an opportunity to play or perform viola. I think it's just very valuable for the musician to be very, as my professor would say, marketable. Because you have more opportunities.
Well, when we had the age of the virtuoso with Paganini, it was very much the specialist, and that hung on. And now I'm seeing my students who are now in college. I've got a student at Oberlin studying music production, and he can play. I was just in awe. I went to a musical that he played here in Montclair, and he would pick up his mandolin, and then he would pick up a baton and conduct, and then he would pick up his violin and play, and then he would pick up his guitar and play. It's like he was good at so many things. And I think that's how the next generation for a little while is going to have to be to make it in the very tough world of music.
That's very interesting you
To
say
be
that. So you're
successful.
saying that more conservatory students should branch out outside their instrument.
I think if they want to continue being active in the musical world, they should be open
Hmm.
to trying different things, like not just say I'm only going to do classical music because whatever. Try some other options because you might need it.
Definitely. Again, I would never have thought about starting a podcast back when I was in college. I was dedicated most of my years trying to be an orchestral musician, and then
Right, yeah.
learning all the excerpts you can find, like Mahler 1, Mahler 5, the Beethoven symphonies, the Strauss, tone poems, everything you can imagine. Then before my senior year, I took an audition, and I'm like, well, what am I doing with my life? Is this sustainable for me? I still love music, but I don't know if I want to, and this is a kind of realistic conversation that I hope the young audience gets to take value from, because you don't have to define yourself as only a orchestral musician or just a chamber musician. You could be a little bit of everything, so that way you create more opportunities for yourself. I think just being open, as you said, is just really key into just becoming just a musician, that playing music and becoming an artist. I think that's something that we can continue all striving. But when it comes to chamber music, what kind of composer do you like to perform? Have there been any, like, lately that you've been reading, or something that you've been really interested in?
Well, so the last concert I did, I still have a couple earworms from it. We did the Dvorak American Quartet,
Sure.
and Dvorak was a violist, and so it's not surprising that there's some good tunes in there.
There are some great tunes. Yeah, Dvorak has great melodies, especially especially in the American. Um,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on, like, any solo viola or violin repertoire that you're fond of? Like, when it comes to, like, teaching your more advanced students, do you branch out of Suzuki, as we mentioned before, and kind of set up your
Well,
own repertoire, or would you
well,
like?
I've been using the I'm deeply invested in the American String Teachers Association ASTICAP program, because I think it offers so many benefits, helping students set short, medium, and long-term goals. Like it blows my 6-year-old mind when I tell them, well, we're doing this now because I'm really planning on in 10 years you doing this. And, they were like, oh, I just thought this was this year's activity, was signing up for violin. You need to plant the seeds that this is a long-term project and I'm going to be there the whole time. And the curriculum is very Suzuki friendly up about halfway through it. Once you get past Suzuki Book 4, you run into problems because Suzuki ran into problems. He did not have the copyright permissions for the pieces that he wanted in those middle books. He wanted things like Chardas, things like Meditation from Thais. He wanted those things in there. That's why you look how skinny books 5, 6, 7, and 8 are. They're basically stripped down to just Handel sonatas that he had the copyright permissions for. So I do add those other style periods into my students playing at that time. By the time they get into junior high and high school, then I just have them whip out their cell phone and they take a picture of the suggested repertoire list. And I say, go spend the summer YouTubing and you come back and tell me what you want to learn, because I was getting tired of always, I know which ones are the easiest pieces on the list, but I was always tired of teaching exactly the same ones. I don't mind teaching the same thing over and over again because you do get better each time that you teach it. Hence the very first twinkle variation. I don't get tired of teaching it.
Yeah,
but it has been fun to see some of the pieces that the kids have picked off the list. Last summer, they picked up banjo and fiddle.
Oh, that's a classic. I love banjo and the fiddle. I've played that in my Suzuki book.
What a romp is that? It's so fun.
It's so fun. And imagine, playing that with like 17 other violinists. It's great. Just a big sound, violin sound.
You got them all to do that. That's amazing.
I didn't, but I'm from Chicago, and there's this really amazing violin pedagogue, Betty Hay Kunke. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she's still teaching Suzuki, and she's incredible. And we would have like these biweekly not studio classes, but like repertoire classes where like the students would be there for like 2.5 hours just playing through the repertoire. And we'd start from not from Twinkle. I mean, the older students didn't have to arrive at the Twinkle stages, but halfway through we would play like 1.5 hours worth of music. But then come to concert, we would start from the most difficult piece, and then we would go down all the way to Suzuki 1, which is introduced in traditional Suzuki, method style, where you have all of these violins. Just it's incredible. Like, but you have like this entire stage full of Suzuki students in Chicago Symphony Hall, which is something that I'll take with me for the rest of my life. And I think that's what inspired me as well to be a Suzuki teacher, because my aunt was a violin teacher, and just the level of like discipline she was able to, Mrs. Haig, the level of discipline that she's able to kind of commit to the students. I'm like, okay, well, no, this didn't sound good. And she would make everybody practice for the next repertoire class. Like, believe me, she would. But yeah, she somehow put in banjo and fiddle in the repertoire class, and it worked out lovely. It was fun. It's one of those.
Yeah, kids can do amazing things because there's a little bit of safety in numbers, and there's motivation in numbers. They want to keep up with their friends and.
Yeah, I think what's cool about music is that there's that social aspect of everything, right? I think that's something that we're lacking these days, and hopefully, as the year goes on, it'll get better. But you said you had a studio of 80 students at one point. How were you able
At one point, I did that. I was teaching. Most of my career, I'm not so much since Boho Buddies has taken over my time, but I've taught around lovely private schools where I could see students during the day, during their recess or their choice periods, or immediately after school. And then I would see community students, up into the early evening hours. And now.
So it's not like you had 80 students in one studio. You had probably multiple teaching obligations that.
I taught at either my home studio, at the school, or on weekends up at the college. I love my affiliation with the local college because they give me their most lovely graduate piano student to accompany the group classes. We really have been missing the group classes this last year because the kids need to see each other. They need to play with each other. And then I also recommend that once the kids have finished book one, that they have either some kind of an orchestra experience, either from the beginning ensemble that the college offers up to, we have in the New York area, we have several youth orchestra options.
Right, in New York, yeah.
And the kids, some of them are doing some virtual programs that the kids seem to enjoy. They come and tell me, oh, I learned that in theory class that we did online. I'm like, oh, that's good.
Sure.
We're really hoping that we're going to really enjoy seeing each other again in September. We're hanging our hat that September will be normal, right?
Cross our fingers, yeah. You seem to have like 100% focus on your students and on Bohold buddies. What do you like to do outside of music? I mean, I know it's really important for us musicians to kind of take a mental break. We're around music all the time. Is there any hobbies that you like and anything that you like to do in your spare time?
Yeah, my husband, I turn the camera around, but my husband's there. Steve, smile. I love plants.
I'm not one of them.
Oh, okay.
No, we're a pretty musical household. My husband's a bandsman. He has recently founded a community band in our area, and
wonderful.
Used to be an Air Force band commander. And I love gardening. I'm right now waiting for the snow to melt because I'm hoping that my tulip bulbs that I planted are doing fine and they're going to put on a great show in a month.
Goodness, yeah, we've had a lot of snow in the East Coast, especially in the Northeast where we are. I mean, New Jersey had a lot of snow just a couple of weeks ago.
Right, yeah, we're about done with snow.
You've had it up to here with snow. You're done.
We're like noticing the snow is strong. Let it keep going. I mean, the sun is strong. Let's melt the snow away and get on with spring. We're ready.
Yeah, we've been getting a lot more sunlight here as well, and we're like, let's bring on the sun.
On the other hand, being all set up with remote teaching, we didn't miss any lessons.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good. Although, this actually brings up an interesting conversation in terms of connectivity to the students, because have you had any experience with students not being able to go online? Has there ever been a point where that was the case?
Yeah, I've lost a few lessons here and there due to technical difficulties. But I've since switching completely over to Musi, they've been much, much less. I think its secret to its success is that it has somewhere in its software, it detects how much bandwidth is available. And so if it knows that it's not a lot of bandwidth, it'll shrink the picture that you see of each other. So you get a tinier picture with not so many glitches and freezings.
I understand. Okay, I'll have to take a look at that. Musi.live, right?
Musi.live, M-U-Z-I-E.
M-U-Z-I-E. Got it.
Definitely check it out. It's so superior to Zoom and to Skype. And it seems to work whether kids are seeing me on a 10-year-old tablet or an iPhone. The students that insisted last summer on seeing me funneled through their Xbox on the big TV over the fireplace, they had so many glitches, they ended up not continuing. I lost maybe 4 or 5 students just because they just wouldn't, they were locked into whatever technology they wanted and it wasn't working.
Wasn't working. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, because I know that there's
and the very youngest students, like I wouldn't recommend 4 and 5-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
To have, it's really hard to give them a longer experience. The ones that have continued, I've like cut their lessons to like 15 minutes just to keep them going.
Right. Or divide up the lesson in 2 parts throughout the week. I know that I've done that as well.
Yeah, that would have been good. I didn't think of that. That's a good idea.
Yeah,
And
I can't take the credit. I got an idea from somebody else. But like, yeah, if they're
and
signed up
I
for like
didn't.
a certain amount of time, then you split them up and
Yeah, that would have been that was a good idea. But those little students, I'm hoping they'll give it a try again in September. And I do have a handful of students that come to my studio. My music studio is pretty small, 10 feet deep and maybe 7 feet wide. So I was able to bifurcate it with a plastic shower curtain pretty well.
mm,
And so with masks and shower curtains and hand sanitizer galore, we've managed to stay
the
healthy.
galore. Oh yeah, you're telling me just like, the
Just
Lysol
keep it
hand
away from the
wipes.
violin, please.
I could just picture like, 20 years from now, it's like, do you have those games where like, well, what time period are what is this time period? You just like hold up a medical mask and everybody's gonna know it's been 2020, 2021. Um,
Yeah, but the kids are pretty flexible with it.
yeah,
But
I'm super impressed with all the students who have been really resilient and have like really flexible with this situation. I can't imagine being a 5 or 6 year old and understanding, wait, I'm supposed to go to school. Why aren't I in school? Yeah. And I just the psychology behind that, I give them a lot of credit for the
I
parents or for
home,
the
yeah,
students.
I
And
homeschooled my own daughter up through fifth grade. So I loved having her around, but I do understand it was always a juggle to get things done.
sure, yeah,
And
I guess especially if you're so used to bringing your child to school and then the child is like, wait, why aren't I going? What's going on?
but when I first saw a picture on Twitter, some violin teacher from France was showing a picture of her teaching from behind a plastic screen, wearing a mask with plastic gloves on. I just
Oh my
found
gosh.
the whole thing so revolting, and it bothered me and bothered me, and I thought about it and I thought about it, and I thought, well, what's really bothering me, a lot of the Twitter commenters were like, well, you can't play the violin with rubber gloves, but I'm like, no, what was bothering me was the lack of face, because like I said before, music is so personal. And one of the lessons I learned from Dr. Suzuki is if you say it with a smile, you can sell it. And if you take the
Amen to
smile out
that.
of the lesson, that's huge. And I found it so abhorrent. And I thought I could never teach that way. I'd rather teach from behind a plastic curtain. But here we are 6 months into it, and I'm wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And
It's also like really nice to smile like, yeah, you need to practice more.
yeah,
And
no,
that's like the indirect jab of like, yeah, you need to practice more.
if you smile, it's okay.
Yeah. Yes, you do need to practice 1 more hour each day. Yes. Ruth, it's been such a joy to be able to speak with you. And thank you so much for responding to my to my tweet, and being able to talk on the Violin Podcast. It's been such a
All right.
pleasure. Where can people learn more about you? And
They can please go up to thingsforstrings.com, things, the number 4, strings.com, and they can learn more about bowhold buddies for violin and viola. Or if they're cellists or bass players with a French style bow, they can learn about the cellophants.
the cellophants? Oh yeah, the cellophants. Yes.
The elephant, it's an elephant for their bow to keep
The
their hands
cello
from
elephants.
coming out.
Yeah. And I will also leave an affiliate link down below in the podcast description notes. So that way you can click on that and be redirected to purchase a bowhold buddy. So Ruth, thanks so much for your time
All
today.
right, it's a pleasure. Thank
Yeah.
you.